Welcome to the Feonix Insider, your all-access pass to the stories shaping the future of mobility and health equity. Each episode, we dive into real-world challenges and innovative solutions that impact transportation access in communities across the country. From candid conversations with industry leaders to first-hand accounts from the individuals we serve, the Feonix Insider gives you a front-row seat as we work toward creating mobility solutions for the health and well-being of every person in every community. Join us on this journey as we pave the way for a more equitable and connected world.
Joining us today on the Feonix Insider is Haleema Bharoocha, and she is a national powerhouse recognized leader in the transportation equity, public safety, and community-centered approaches to transportation safety space. From the local streets of the Bay Area to the national stage, Haleema has been at the forefront of reimagining what safe, inclusive, and transportation can look like, especially for historically marginalized communities. Her impact spans work with major organizations, including the American Public Transit Association, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, and Transform. As a co-lead in the award-winning Not One More Girl campaign on BART, Haleema helped drive state policy changes with California's SB 1161, addressing gender-based violence in public transit. She is also the author of Ride Fearlessly, a framework for reimagining transit safety, and has also presented her research, including decarcerating transportation, at the Transportation Research Board. Featured in Teen Vogue, Bloomberg, KQED, Haleema is a national leader, and she holds a master's in public policy from UC Berkeley's Goldman School and continues to be a visionary voice of leadership in this field. Haleema, thank you so much for your time and for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Wonderful. Well, Haleema, as we get started, I always like to ask folks, what's your story? How did you get started in transportation? What was your first job? Like, of all the things, like, who's Haleema and how did she get to transportation?
Yeah, when I first started my career in my work, I did not know that I would end up in the transportation space. I actually have a background in sociology, and I think that has really informed a lot of my work because it is a study of society. It's a study of culture, understanding systems of oppression. And one thing that I've always been clear on throughout my life has been centering marginalized communities in my work and really thinking about how do we address systemic oppression and harm. I came into transportation by way of my work with Alliance for Girls, which was one of my early jobs in my career. And I started there as the advocacy staff member holding that space and building out our advocacy program. And one of the things that came up through our youth participatory action research was the experiences of young people who continued to say across the board overwhelmingly that they didn't feel safe on public transportation. And that affected them in many ways, from not being able to get a job or hold a certain job, their access and ability to get an education, their ability to get healthcare. And it made me realize that transportation touches so many things, right? It is a lifeline, and it's not just a cheesy tagline that we say, but truly it is, right? When transportation doesn't work, people die. Right? It is the only way for some people to get from point A to point B. And of course, my own experiences as a visibly Muslim woman of color have also informed my interest in this particular issue. One of the first times that I took public transit, BART in particular, which is the 5th largest transit agency in the country, I was harassed. And that experience of harassment didn't go away, right? To this day, I still have to navigate that question of safety when I get on any public transportation system or any public space. And one thing that continued to come up to me was this is not an issue that is unique to California or the Bay Area or the United States. This is a global issue that has been experienced by hundreds of thousands of people across the world. And yet we haven't taken it seriously. We haven't invested in addressing it. And we haven't identified and implemented solutions. And that is really shocking when you think of, at least half the population having this experience, having this as a barrier, and the lack of effort and work that has been done to address it. And so it felt like an issue that was very urgent and very relevant to so many different people. And when we took it on, it was through a coalition-based effort. My approach and theory of change is very much rooted in centering those who have been affected and driving solutions. I think we will not have effective policies unless we bring in the people who are experiencing the issue to say, how would you like to see this solved, right? What works for you? And having that coalition-based effort really allowed us to come up with a very holistic approach to say that there needs to be multiple prongs to this approach. It can't just be a policy change or a campaign that goes up, but you have to do everything across the board to see that system change happen. And so that was one of my early career moments that really drove me in the transportation space. And since then, I have done a lot of work and a lot of different projects, not just on issues of gender, but also thinking about disability, working on improvements to our paratransit system, which is absolutely horrendous in the type of service that it provides to people with disabilities and to seniors. I've done work in looking at the intersection of criminalization and mobility, in looking at how Black and Brown people have not just been criminalized for mobility, for their right to move, but also have been killed because of fare evasion or because of riding a bike on a sidewalk, and really looking into some of these areas. So I feel like transportation is one of those issues that cross-cuts across so many different areas, and you will never get bored. There's always going to be something to do and progress to be made. And I think that was kind of that moment for me when I was at Alliance for Girls that I realized, okay, transportation is really where I want to focus my career.
That is a very powerful story, Haleema. Beautiful testimony to like, you saw and you experienced it and you said, somebody should not have to go through this on their way to school, on their way to the grocery store, on their way to work. Why? And I'm going to do something to change that. So thank you for sharing that and that experience. You know, you mentioned, you know, this moment that when you first experienced harassment in public transit within the first few rides you took on the bus. What was the point? Was there a certain day you remember? Like, I know like you have this like aha moment, this great epiphany, like, or was there a certain experience or whatever where you're like, this has to stop, and today is the day I'm going to commit to this moment, and this, not one more girl should be going through this. Like, was there that moment, or can you take us back to that day or that thought that you had where you're like, you know, this is where it ends and I'm going to be a part of the change?
Yeah. I mean, I remember, you know, when I was living in West Oakland, the harassment was pretty much daily, like every day. And it was a certain block, certain areas, certain individuals. And it kind of became part of the routine where I would go into work and on the way to work, expect that a certain person would say something to me. Right outside the entrance of the BART station. And it got to the point where I was scheduling meetings, you know, past 9:30, because I knew coming in at 9, I needed that space to decompress. I'd probably be a little bit thrown off. And I just thought that, you know, I shouldn't have to change my life in this radical way. There were times where the harassment was so intense, or that it got to the point where it really took a toll on my mental health, where I wasn't even feeling comfortable walking outside, right? I could feel that tension in my shoulders. I remember one time this guy, you know, he was verbally, you know, saying something to me, and I was just my whole body had this like startle moment. And I was so startled that he got startled. And I just thought, you know, yeah, something needs to change. Like, this is not a way to live. And there would be points where I would take Uber or Lyft instead of taking public transportation, because I just felt like I just can't take one more incident today. Like, that is going to break me. And those were the type of moments that really made me think about, you know, how do I live my life long term if this is, you know, the kind of thing that I'm having to deal with every day. And then hearing the stories of young people who said, oh, I thought that was normal, right? I thought that's just what happens on my way to school. And I remember one young person who went to middle schools and high schools in the Bay Area to talk to young people about their experience. And one girl, she kind of talked about it like an escape maze situation. Or she said, well, I always know this guy's here, so I have to take this little turnaround to avoid this person. And I'm thinking, like, you're in middle school. This is, you know, beyond unacceptable. And so those were, I think, some moments for me that were just like, almost shook me and said, you know, something has to change. And this is not an issue that can wait. It's very much urgent. And when we had finally launched the campaign, Not One More Girl Initiative, which we took 2 years to build on the back end, because we wanted to be intentional and we were moving with young people at the table in our working group, when we finally launched the initiative, I remember one of the young people, she came to me and she said, like, I thought we'd be grandmas by the time this happened. And it's so exciting to see this while we are still young, while we are still actively using public transportation. And so that was, I think, a really powerful kind of moment where we could see the progress that we made and we could see the impact that this work had. And all of us kind of had that feeling of excitement to ride BART again. And that was not a feeling that I think many of us had felt in a very long time.
Yeah. And I think too many folks don't understand and they take for granted the feeling of safety. I remember talking to a woman and she was a social worker at one of the nonprofits. And, you know, she said, Valerie, I take public transit, but she said, I get on the bus and she says, I change how I dress. I don't wear jewelry. I don't wear makeup. And I look down at the floor. I do not make eye contact with people on the bus. And I hold my purse with both hands and I sit like this. And I just wait for my stop. And I was like, well, how long is that? I mean, one, that's awful, but two, how long is it? An hour and a half. Well, an hour and a half with your head down, holding your purse, hoping nobody touches you wrong, hoping nobody says something sexual to you. Like, that's not okay. Why do you think, you're dumping into this, why do you think so long this has gone on with nobody going, like, maybe we should do something about it? Like, at what point do we as a society, like, how has just been just kind of like cast away? Like, where do you think the message or this barrier has become like, well, you should just be glad you got it?
Yeah. I think there's a couple things that I've learned from my own experience. You know, I went to pretty much every transit agency in the Bay Area and knocked on their door and said, hey, we have a problem. We're coming to you with solutions. Let's work together. And many of them were scared to talk about it. I think there is this concern about if we admit that harassment is happening on our system, we are now liable for it. I think the other concern is if we talk about it, the community is not going to like how we talk about it, and there's going to be pushback. And I've seen, you know, some agencies try to do campaigns or initiatives on their own, and indeed they have gotten pushback. They have done put out messaging that is victim blaming or just very high level, saying things that so many of us are already socialized to do, right? From day one, you are told, you know, tell your friends where you are, carry this with you. Like, those are all things that we already know. And we don't need an agency to tell us that. We need them to really step up and create resources to protect, right? And to call this out. So I think there's a fear of addressing the issue. I think the other piece is funding. If you want to address this issue meaningfully, you have to work with the ridership. You have to work with the community. And people at this time and place, they need to be compensated. They cannot come to the table and say, I'm going to give you all this free labor. And of course, right now we're at a time where transportation is dealing with a lot of cuts. And this tends to fall on the bottom of the list of priorities. So certainly there's a lot there. And then you also don't have a whole lot of examples in the US that you can point to and say, oh, that's what we should do. This is a model that we can actually follow. And I think a lot of times government, they really care about precedent. They don't want to be the first one to try something new and go out on a branch and say, let's innovate. I think a lot of times they would prefer to see a safer approach and say, oh, this person did it. These were the outcomes. This is what we can learn from that. I will say, you know, agencies outside of BART that have taken substantial initiatives to address this issue or LA Metro. They did a whole study on how women travel, very comprehensive, not just looking at safety, but also looking at other elements like people who have caregiving responsibilities. How does a fare affect people who are taking multiple stops, getting on and off, right? What does it mean for someone who has a child with them? So there's so many elements, you know, when you think about gender and travel. And those are, I think, now just barely at the surface being started to understood. LA Metro found that even when women had access to transportation, they weren't using it. And again, that's because of the safety concern that comes up and so many other barriers that people face when they're trying to use these systems. So I think there are barriers there, but I do think as advocates, we can come to agencies understanding that and tailoring our approach. One thing that we shared when we came to BART was letting them know that because you're working with a community, you don't have to worry about that pushback or that worry that we're going to get this wrong and the community's going to hate you. Right. And we were also prepared for the fact that, we were community-based organizations doing this work, but we're not going to be representing every single person. And so there's a chance that someone's going to come out and say, I don't like how you did this. And we were prepared to take that feedback and make adjustments. And I think being open to that level of feedback and critique is really helpful. But agencies really struggle on how to take that and then move forward. So I think having us as community partners to facilitate the process made such a difference for the agency to feel more secure about what they were doing and to kind of go out on a branch a little bit and say, okay, we're going to pay, middle school youth, we're going to pay high school youth, and we're going to take a very explicit equity approach in doing this. And because we have the backing of these community organizations and because they are kind of the face of this, we're not as concerned about how is this going to be received or, could this actually cause harm rather than help? And so that made a huge difference.
Absolutely. I think that it's brilliant how you laid out the different layers of where's the liability, who's going to be on the hook, how the messaging is done, how the resources have to be allocated. And you're right, you cannot expect this to be done for free. It to have the right team, the right talent, the right approach. That is sincerely, you need a skill and you need investment in the folks who are making the buses safer, who are making the transit system safer. And between the funding, the messaging, the liability, all those pieces, there's just like, well, it's just too complicated, so we're not going to do it. And so kudos to BART and LA Metro for saying, we believe in the safety of women and everybody, every single person on this bus, on this subway, in a streetcar needs to be safe and needs to feel accepted and needs to make sure that they can travel without being harassed. And I think that they should be commended for that, and that other organizations and other transit agencies really should, say it can be done and it should be.
Yeah. And I'll add to that and say that there's things that you can do for free. I think sometimes, agencies think that, you have to invest and do a whole thing, right? I mean, it's nice when you can do a whole, very, full thought out initiative with multiple phases and partners, but there's things that you can do that integrate into your existing work as an agency, like tracking sexual harassment, right? That's not something that's required in reporting requirements because they're explicitly focused on crimes. Right. And there's forms of sexual harassment that are not technically against the law. They're not criminal, but we still actually want riders to know that you can report that. We want to know about it and it's not acceptable. Right. And agencies already typically are going to be doing reporting of some kind on these type of things. It's a matter of adding an additional category. Right. If they're doing a rider survey, which many agencies already do, add a question about gender. Right. Add a question about harassment. So there isn't always necessarily a need to say, like, we have to invest all this money, because I know some agencies are truly stretched. They're understaffed, right? They're not all going to be big like BART is. They might be smaller systems, right? Doing much more smaller coverage, smaller staffing. And so there's a lot of things that agencies can do that are going to, not have any cost attached to it. And I think that's a step that I wish, more agencies went out and say, like, let's make that effort and do that.
And I love the perspective of saying, let's just create a place where this data lives. So we do know if it's happening and we know how frequent it is happening. When I first got started in public transit, I was working with Title 6 and making sure that if folks had a complaint, they knew they could file it and where to file it. But nowhere in Title 6 does it talk about discrimination or harassment as a woman. And explicitly making that clear. And the stories of women who rode public transit and what they experience is just absolutely insane. And it doesn't have to cost a fortune to do something, to your point.
It does not.
So in 2019, the Alliance for Growth study found that 100% of surveyed girls, including trans and gender nonconforming youth, had experienced some form of sexual and gender-based harassment in the Bay Area transit system. Why do you think that transit agencies And I know we talked about this a little bit, so don't feel like you have to repeat it, but why do you think that just things haven't been done sooner, or this hasn't come to like the top of the conversation? Because I mean, this was 2019, but public transit's been around a while. Like, why did it take so many years for this to become a conversation?
Yeah. I mean, I think another aspect of it is you to look at how these systems were built and the mindset that they were built in. A lot of them have a very male-centric design. A lot of them were built for people who are living in the suburbs to commute into a city for a job and then go back to the suburbs. And so a lot of that does affect the design of the system. And I think, of course, even how people think about transportation is almost that it is a subpar service. And we just accept that it will be a subpar service for poor people. We don't have high expectations or standards that public transit should be excellent. It should be actually a choice that you want to take. It is seen as, well, you're forced to take it. You don't have any other choice. You're not going to be able to complain. And if you do, oh, well, because you're still going to ride it and because that's all you have, right? And that is a mindset that has been extremely detrimental to public transportation, right? A lot of my work with Not One More Girl and in general in the transportation field has been focused on narrative change and cultural change, because it's not enough to change policy. You have to change how people think about something and their behavior. And that's not going to happen with saying, oh, I put in, SB 1161 and this is what's supposed to happen. I think the messaging and how we frame the narrative, how we talk about this really matters. And being able to call out this kind of narrative that has existed for so long is important as a starting point. And then to say, how do we turn that around? How do we make sure that our public services are actually excellent and a choice that people want to choose?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we see the same thing in non-emergency medical transportation within Medicaid. It's not, how was your ride? It's, be glad you got a ride.
Exactly.
And so when we talk about youth-driven change, it's so powerful. More than 300 community members, 1,100 youth, 11 artists, 15 organizations, like bringing all those folks together around this initiative to say girls' voices matter and girls should be safe in our communities. What was that like for you? And then why, it's difficult to navigate that many folks and make sure everybody feels like their voice is heard and respected and equal. Like, what was that experience like? And then why the youth?
Yeah, the experience was very powerful to see so many people coalesce around a shared goal. When we started with the initiative, we did town halls across the Bay Area, not specifically on this issue, but to see what were the issues that were coming up. Because as you know, girls and gender expansive youth have so many issues that they're dealing with on a daily basis. Transit safety was one of them. And we wanted to identify, where do we feel like there is political will today that we can build on to really do something about this. And so that was how we identified this is an issue that organizations do want to address. We use those town halls to also gather ideas and solutions. And then I put together a coalition of organizations that would kind of serve as the body that would really move that work forward, right? Having meetings with elected officials, with board members, with agency staff to see where we could get an agency to actually make a commitment. And we also then went back to the community and said, we talked with you a few months ago. We're coming back to you with a list of solutions that have been crowdsourced. What have we missed? What do you think about this? Could this have a negative impact? To really solidify that this is what people wanted. And when we finally got BART to take this on, we had an hour of public comment. A lot of them were from middle school and high school youth who had never given public comment in their life, who took time out of school to come there and tell their elected officials, we want you to invest in this initiative. And so there was a lot of support that helped us to build. And I think from an organizing perspective, that's important, right? You want to build that community pressure. And with the focus on young people really came from the youth participatory research that initially Alliance for Girls had done, where we found this information. And I think it was very strategically helpful when we were going to board members, when we were speaking at these meetings, because no elected official wants to say, I don't care about the safety of a young girl, right? No one wants to be on the record saying that. And so we got unanimous support for this initiative. We were able to pass it. We were able to get BART to set aside dollars for this initiative for phase one, and really develop it. Of course, there is hurdles along the way, right? There's always going to be those barriers, those kind of figuring out how does an agency work with the community at this level, right? One of them was, how do we pay young people? Because BART didn't have a mechanism to pay individual youth. And so we were able to do that by having them pay the CBO, and then the CBO would disperse the funding, right? So there's logistical things that we figured out along the way. But I think that community focus really helped. And then when we were able to go live with the initiative, it was also helpful to have all that support. And I would keep folks updated along the way so they could stay involved and know that the work and the voice and the time that they put in actually went somewhere. So I think too often we go to communities, we ask them for their feedback, their input, and they never hear from us again. And I thought it was really important for them to know that we didn't forget about you. We didn't forget about that conversation. That is actually going somewhere. And to that end, we also requested that BART include updates regularly about their data collection efforts so that we know what the reporting is looking like. And that is now publicly available on their website as well.
That's amazing. And I love that you share the detail of how that process and how that initiative really built and the moving pieces within those conversations, because you're 1,000% on. Nobody wants to, I would hope that nobody wants a young girl to experience harassment and be unsafe. And definitely as a elected official, you don't want to go on record saying, I don't care about, the safety of girls. And so, one, kudos, that was brilliant. And two, the fact that everybody moved forward, you worked through the logistics, and it's come to where it's at now. And so have you seen change? What was the impact? So they implemented it, and of course it's in phases and layers and phases and layers as everything is in these programs. Kind of how did it go once you're like, okay, it's passed, we are moving forward? What did that look like, and have they seen progress?
Yeah, when we launched the initiative, this was right around after the shelter in place period had kind of been lifted. So ridership was low.
Yes. Right.
During COVID, yes. We were actually supposed to launch the initiative right when COVID hit. So we took an extra year to work on it, which I think looking back was good because it allowed us to really put in a lot more detail and work and add more layers before it went live. But when we went live, we didn't just say, oh, here's the initiative. We did a press conference. We went to communities in person, did pop-up events, multilingual, with the CBOs that we've been working with to directly talk to people about it, to get their feedback. We also had a randomized online survey that was sent out to all riders, asking them, have you seen these, have you seen the campaign? Have you heard about it? Has it made you feel safer? Has it made you more aware about the issue? Do you know what to do if you see or experience it? And we saw really positive results in that reporting and that data. Phase 2 has been focused on bystander intervention and really thinking about how do we as a community look out for each other, moving away from a very individual approach to individual culture, right? And having it be a lot more collective. And so that is also has had that feedback and that measurement. And I think, it's interesting because I don't feel that a lot of times agencies will actually measure the impact of these types of programs. And so, for me, that was a very important thing because we want to actually see tangible change. We want outcomes. We want results. It's nice to have a campaign. It's nice to have, all that press and people to say, oh, this is cool. But did it actually make you safer on a tangible level, right? Because that is the outcome that we wanted to see. And so it's very helpful to see that an overwhelming percentage were saying, yes, I did feel safer just by hearing about this, not even going into the details of the resources that were provided or anything else, but just by knowing that this has been done, I feel better.
Yeah. And I think just the ability to acknowledge
Yes.
right? That this is happening and that we want to make a difference. It enables you to know I might be feeling this now, but it'll go away, or I think it's going to end, eventually somebody's going to talk to this person who's making these statements, and I won't have to change my route anymore.
Yeah.
So we're talking about the cultural shift on transit, and then you talked about the new campaign. What was this? The new one, the bystander intervention. What's the second tier of the
So
campaign?
the first phase was just focus on the basics. Like, let's start with getting reporting data. Let's talk about it and call it out as an issue. The whole campaign is called Not One More Girl, and then it has phase 1, phase 2. But the initiative itself has gotten to a point where it is institutionalized. Station agents know about it. The police department knows about it, right? Staff across the board are aware of the initiative. And it's not just sitting with one person. So I think that also tends to happen when you do anything, equity related or anything of this nature. It's one person that's championing it. And that's very dangerous. You don't want it to be that way. You want everyone to hold on to it. BART's chief communication officer is kind of the main project manager who really championed this, and having someone at that executive staff level makes a huge difference in what you're able to get done.
But if we can look at the positive in that, some of the research that came out around the second phase that did get launched, where 59% of riders say they now know what to do if they witness harassment. That is so impressive. That is mind-blowing. That 60% of folks, that they see somebody not being treated right, somebody being harassed or touched inappropriately or whatever that may be, they know how to intervene. And riders' sense of improvement, riders' sense of safety has improved by 36%. Those aren't small numbers. That these numbers tell you a cultural shift is underway.
Yes, no, absolutely. It was very good to see those results. They've been very consistent across phase 1 and phase 2. With the second phase on bystander intervention, you can actually get these bystander intervention cards at the station that says, I got you, where you can kind of discreetly slip it to someone to let them know that you want to step in and you're going to help them in some way, or a card that you can slip to someone if you need help that says, you got me. And I thought that was a great way of providing this discreet and safe approach for riders to show solidarity and help each other, again, very tangibly. And it's really important for us to move towards that collective culture. A lot of times people think, well, that's not my problem. And I think about the woman on SEPTA who was sexually assaulted and people took videos. Nobody stepped in. It was a horrific story that I think really, really shook me. And it made me think about, why don't people do something when they see this happen? And I've been doing bystander intervention training since 2016 on how to intervene if you see any form of harassment, be it hate-based or gender-based. And I think a lot of times people just freeze and they don't know what to do. And so with this campaign, we were giving people something specific on what they can do, and not just saying, do something, but being specific on what that something is.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, that dimension of don't freeze, but here's how, and here are your steps. These are the pieces of the puzzle that right now, and especially as we isolate ourselves during COVID, or just as more folks are like just living on this digital space, the sense of community has changed so dramatically. And it's almost like you have to invite them to care or invite them to step in. And I think the marketing director should be given an Emmy or some kind of Webby or something, because the slogan of I got you, you got me, just that sense of community of we are in this together. We are both riding transit. I care for you. I care for my community. You care for me. We will hold each other through this situation or through life, not in reality. But I think
and if you ride transit regularly, you will start to see some of the same faces on your route. Whenever I have a regular schedule, I will see some of the same people. I don't know them. I've never spoken to them, but I know that they ride this route, and I start to get familiar. So there is a way to kind of build that community, I think, And BART has done, I think a good job of, even outside of this initiative, having events. They did a speed dating, speed friend making event. They did a Star Wars themed event. And it's a way for people to build community. They've done book clubs and book readings on the system. Last year for Transit Month, I did a crafting event where we all rode the BART together and did craft projects. So I think there is a way for us to, think about placemaking and community building, through this system. Like, we're all going to be on this for like an hour. Might as well make some friends or get to know each other or have that kind of community. And I think that is something that people are really drawn towards. It's gotten, so much turnout whenever BART has those type of events. It's always a full train. And it's really great to see.
That is so impressive. Like transit goals right there, to be able to engage a community beyond just, I got you there, but to say this should be enjoyable. This should be a place where you build community, where you make friends, where you create connections. And especially we talk about as a society, the mental health needs that we are seeing, and especially the mental health needs of youth, like the statistics of youth who have experienced suicidal ideations has skyrocketed. And to be able to build a place of connection and an intentional, like you are inviting individuals who are in that car, who may be like staring at each other from across the way or see each other as they go to sit down, to be like, this doesn't need to be creepy, but like, hey, how are you doing?
Yeah.
Hey, how was your day?
And there's stories of people who have met on BART and have they even done weddings on BART. It's very beautiful.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Let's talk about vision for the future, right? It's a very complicated time right now to move forward. And when you think about the future of active transportation, we'll have Black, Indigenous people and people of color leadership at the table, and we'll move away from punitive measures towards people having what they need to travel safely. I think there's the saying in many different advocacy groups, but predominantly I've heard it, the disability advocacy, nothing about us without us. And having leaders at the table who have experienced harassment, who have witnessed and had family members or themselves personally been pulled over because of the color of their skin, and know firsthand what that fear looks like and what that experience is when your brother gets arrested at a bus stop because the bus didn't come and he was waiting for the next one. Like, if that's you and your family, it's another deal than somebody else saying, oh, well, I guess that's unfortunate. It's just, it'll show up in the data. But like, when you have folks at the table who represent the communities being served, what are your experiences in seeing those organizations see that representation?
Yeah, I mean, when you have people who are affected by the issue at the table, the results are transformative, right? Not One More Girl is definitely an example of what it looks like when you bring people who are affected by the issue as decision makers along the way. And it's important to go beyond identity politics. I think a lot of times there's a focus on, well, let's make sure we have someone who looks like this and this and this at the table, and that's going to solve our problem. But we have to think about value alignment and what values are these people bringing to the table, right? And are they actually an accurate representation of that community? But I think when we work with BIPOC communities, you will get a much more different transformative outcome when it comes to the relationship that people have with the land, with their neighborhoods, with their communities, the approach that they would take to creating safety on their streets. And we need to see more of that. But unfortunately, again, we're in a time where anything, quote unquote, DEI, and I almost hate the term DEI because it creates this branch of like, this is a separate thing that happens here in this corner and everything else is, different. But really, how are we integrating a community-centered approach into everything that we do, right? And that is so critical. Part of it, also starts with funding. Are we funding projects in specific neighborhoods, right? Along high injury networks that we know have high rates of fatalities, right? Are we looking at laws that don't make sense? In California, we repealed the jaywalking law. We are no longer criminalizing people for crossing the street, right? We, as human beings, have always moved across the planet, but we've decriminalized jaywalking in California. In Philadelphia, they've enforced a law where Minor infractions are no longer something that a police officer can pull someone over for. It's not something that they need to be doing, right? It's not something that is serious enough where someone with a gun needs to pull you over. So there's a lot of things that we can be doing to really, again, minimize the impact that enforcement has on BIPOC communities, to eliminate, if possible, those interactions. So there's a lot there, but I think of a quote from Arundhati Roy, who said, "Another world is possible, and on a quiet day, I can hear her coming." And I think, we have to have that mindset of, this isn't how this is going to be forever. We have to be able to say out loud, this is what I'd like to see, right? I want to see more green spaces. I want to see protected bike lanes and sidewalks. I want to see this type of infrastructure, and we have to be able to say that out loud, and we have to dream big and be bold with how we think about these initiatives.
Yeah, absolutely. Haleema, you nailed it. And I think we can wrap it there, because that is exactly the future we want to create, and we need to keep going. Well, Haleema, if you had a magic wand and you could fix one thing with what's happening in safety of our transit system, safety of our communities, what would you do with it and why?
I think the first thing is to take away enforcement, armed enforcement, away from transportation. And it will save so many lives, and also so much money. I think we have spent way too much funding and resources on putting in armed police officers, whether it's on our transit systems, whether it is in bikeways or walkways, to do something that hasn't provided results and has actually been detrimental to so many people. And so if I could wave a magic wand, absolutely would work on removing enforcement from transportation and looking at how we can redirect those resources and funding into community-based approaches and infrastructure investments.
Absolutely. Well, Haleema, thank you so much for joining us today on the Feonix Insider. I enjoyed this incredible discussion, and I'm just still absolutely in awe of, how the work that you have done has changed history. And I really am just blown away by your leadership and strength, and for sharing your story with the world. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thanks for joining us on the Feonix Insider, where we explore the road to mobility equity together. Don't forget to subscribe and share this episode with your network to keep the conversation going. Together, we can break down transportation barriers and create lasting change. Visit Feonix.org to find out how you can help improve access for everyone. We'll catch you next time on the Feonix Insider as we continue driving forward toward a more equitable future.